what are the wealthy spending their money on in terms of longevity? What does that routine kind of look like?
Well, I
Because I
mean,
can
you
go to
know,
the extreme and talk about Brian Johnson, of
right,
course, and we all
right.
can. And, you know, anyway, that's for another podcast. But
Well, I would, I'm going to see if I can come at this question from a couple of different angles. First, I always say that, wealthy people didn't get wealthy by being stupid with their money. So a lot of times, even though they may have more discretionary income, they're just really diligent about trying to understand exactly, the opportunity and the efficacy of a lot of these different treatments that you can see around the world. But they are typically a little bit more willing and a little bit less, I don't want to say less risk averse, but a little bit more, a larger appetite for pushing the envelope on some of the
experimental.
newer alternative medicines. I see a lot of that in plant medicine world. You see a lot of it in stem cell world. You're seeing a lot more of it now in, this quote, sort of the yogi, breath work world,
Yeah.
right? Where,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of that. And I think, another thing that I do want to say is they said, well, this is only for the wealthy, and it is expensive. It's expensive to innovate. It's expensive to manufacture, create, and deliver, but the wealthy have always sort of paved the way on the path to the democratization of breakthrough, treatments and therapies like this. It's happening right now in space travel. The
True.
uber wealthy
Yeah.
are able to go to space for 9-10 days on the space station. If you got an extra 75, $80 million burning a hole in your pocket, you can do it. Will it always cost that much? No, it won't. And will stem cells always be this expensive? I don't think so. I mean, some people envision a world where you can take a pill and it will reprogram your cells in vivo, in the body. And it's not that far away. And so
Yeah.
I would just say that they are spending their money on things that are going, it's not like, vampires trying to live forever kind of a thing. It is, I want to be healthy. And the number one fear of elderly people is loss of independence,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If money's not a concern, if you've saved well, you've been fiscally responsible, then your number one fear is loss of independence, and that means you can't drive anymore, and you lose your mobility, or you can't remember, to turn the stove off, and you become a danger to yourself. So that loss of independence is something that everybody fears, and it can show up in a number of different ways. And so I would say that, when you've got discretionary income and you have resources that you've built, there seem to be focused on that. And it's really about doing things they love to do or want to do, bucket list things maybe,
Yeah.
for as long as possible. It's not about
That's
trying to
it.
live to, honestly, I don't, out of the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've met and talked to and done this, maybe a handful, less than 10, have talked about trying to live to 150 or 180. I'm not saying they don't want to, but the primary goal is really about that functional decline, man, trying to keep that as intact as possible for as long as possible. And I think that's the right goal, quite frankly.
So what do you include? Like, you've been exposed to a lot of, real high level thought leaders who are pushing the envelope in this space. What do you include in your day-to-day routine? And you've sort of touched on that. If we could briefly just go over that, what do you include? What have you taken the best bits of, and now you're like dedicated, you run your day-to-day routine. And I hate using the word hacks.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, to a certain extent, it's just a word, but so for me, I'm kind of late to the party on some of this stuff. It's really funny. I was at NYU, and one of the actors in my student film there was a breathwork guy, and he went into the Berkshires, and he's been doing breathwork for the last 30 something years. And he was trying to tell me about it back then, but I was so hard headed that I didn't pay attention. So I'm kind of late to the party with this stuff. For the last few years, I've been doing it, but my routine in the morning looks like I wake up. The first thing I do is, a quick prayer of gratitude, right? I'm looking for gratitude and humility to start my day. And I'm not saying the wheels don't fall off by 10 o'clock some mornings, but that's where I go first and foremost. The second thing I do is I go to breath work. I immediately try to get into my breath work and regulate my nervous system and get everything calmed so that I can get up and start the day. From there, it's, typically a quick meditation. Sometimes I'm not great at meditating. I'll tell everybody right now, I'm not a guy that can sit there for 30 or 45 minutes. If I squeeze 8 to 10 minutes into a meditation,
You good?
it's a pretty good one for me, and that's just, my brain just starts spinning and running, and
Yeah.
through practice, I'll get better at it. I like to work out in the morning. So right after all that stuff, sometimes I'll hit a little black coffee, as the stimulant to go work out, right? Because I've read somewhere that, creatine, coffee, and, pretty much protein, caffeine, these are the kind of things that actually have a pretty good impact on,
And it
your
increases fat
workouts.
loss as well.
It increases fat
Is
loss.
yeah, yeah, it's the story of my life.
Yeah. So I'll do that and, get the workout in. And I'm an early riser, so a lot of this stuff happens pretty early. And then, I've got the 6 things, right? I say Ivy Lee's 6 things is how I run my day. I put, the night before, I list the 6 most important things in order of priority that I have to do the next day. I don't move on from number 1 to number 2 until number 1 is done, even if that means it takes all day. And there's a great story about Charles Schwab and Ivy Lee is where I stole that from. Have you heard that story?
No, do it.
So Schwab was head of Bethlehem Steel back in the early 1900s, and Ivy Lee was this productivity guru. And Schwab said, "Hey, I want you to come interview my executive team and see how we can be more productive." And Ivy Lee said, "Give me an hour, with them, and I'll help you." So he went and he talked to him, and he sat down with Charles Schwab, and he says, "What's the number one thing that I need to know?" And he said, "By the way, what do I owe you for meeting with my team?" And he said, "You don't owe me anything right now." He said, "Give it a few months, give it 3 months. And if you think it's worth something, then send me what you think it's worth." So he said, "Well, what can I do?" And he told me about the 6 things. Write down 6 things in order of priority that you need to do tomorrow. And do not move from number 1 to number 2 until number 1 is done. And it's really that simple. And so 3 months later, Charles Schwab sent him a check for $25,000 to Ivy Lee. And I think the modern day equivalent of that would be around $500,000. And it was that simple thing. Sometimes we try to, and I'm guilty. I like apps and I like things and buzzers and reminders and whistles and bells. And I like all that stuff, admittedly. But man, I write down 6 things in a notebook and wake up and start trying to figure that out. The trick is not moving from number 1 to number 2 until number 1 is done. Even if it takes all day, then number 2 becomes number 1 the following day.